G'day, welcome to Pay It Forward. Today I'm bringing you a new free pattern for you all, and yes, it's one of our cuddle dolls. It's been a while, hasn't it? This one I thought would suit this little design perfectly, and look at me being all seasonal and on time. I never ever manage that, but this time we're a month ahead before Halloween. Halloween isn't huge here in Australia, it's getting bigger. But of course in America you're going into your fall, I think, and we're coming into summer. But this is a beautiful little doll that could serve so many purposes. Of course, he could just be a lovely companion. He could be a lovely fall interior doll. He could be a spooky little pumpkin head. I've just made him really sweet, and it's a fantastic pattern to dive into your stash, which is exactly what I did. So a really cute and simple project for you all. You know the drill. The pattern, your free pattern, is in the drop-down description box below. You just need to find that link, click on that, and you'll be able to print out your pattern templates. Do make sure you follow the little measuring guide I have on each page. I include all seam allowances within my patterns. You don't have to do a thing, just cut them out and get going. So in saying that, let's get busy making our little pumpkin head. Now let's begin by having a look at what we need to put this one together. Now all of my cuddle doll bodies are the same. There's only a couple of little differences sometimes in the hands, not in this case. So this is very straightforward. We are going to start with our main body pieces. We have our two back pieces which have an opening marked, but the pieces are actually the same back and front, but you have markings on the back pieces. Now I'm using just a quilting cotton, and I have it interfaced with a fusible woven. It's very important that it's a woven interfacing in a medium weight, and that gives us a really nice stable fabric with a bit of substance to it. So I'm going for this nice little very retro sort of sunflower print. It's going to work with my colours. You can make this any colour you like with all of the fall colours that have come out overseas. I know that you're going to be having a whole lot of fun with that. I've actually just dived into my stash. So we've got our body front and back pieces. For the arms, what you need to do is select your fabric you're going to use for the arms. And mine is a very patchwork kind of a look, this whole doll. I'm going for an orange with a white polka dot. You just need to have your piece of fabric. This isn't interfaced. We need the arms to be quite soft. And fold it in half, right sides together, and trace around your pattern templates. Make sure you reverse the second one. And we're going to be sewing directly on the line with those. Let's move on to, we have little foot pads too for the body, and I'm going with the interfaced felt, which is best for foot pads, and it's also working in with the same colour I'm using in the head. So let's have a look at the head itself, and that is made up simply with 6 pieces. They're all the same. I'm making mine in felt. You certainly can make this up in fabric. I just prefer felt for this project because it gives it that lovely warmth and also a little bit of sort of plumped out volume. And I'm using 2 different colours in my felt, but they're very close in shade. I want it to have that different colourways as it goes around the head. So 6 pieces of felt, and they are also interfaced. So to go on that little head, we're going to be making a stalk at the top, and I have cut that stalk from felt with fusible webbing applied. There's a reason for that. It keeps it strong. We're not actually using it for fusing. So, and we don't want any white core showing, which is why we don't interface it. So our 2 little stalk pieces. And then we have a little leaf that is joined to the head with the stalk piece. This is cut from what I call double felt. So it's 2 pieces of felt fused together with fusible webbing. Then you trace around and cut your pattern piece from that. You'll notice that on the top edge here, I've actually used my pinking shears just around from this corner to this corner. It just gives it a little bit of a cute sort of leaf rough edge when you attach it to the head. The rest I've just cut out as usual. And the way that we're going to attach this stalk and leaf to the top of the head, the way I'm going to do it is with a joint. So this is a 15mm joint. Now I understand you may not be wanting to do that. I'm going to give you another option. What you need are two very flat 2-hole buttons, which will serve as a joint, and I'll show you how to do that. It's simple. It's a good way to add this stalk because it's not actually a joint that's going to be moved. And in this case, it's just done with 2 buttons of exactly the same size, so just mirror that size, which is about 15 to 16 mil. And we will be using extra strong thread to make that joint. We do, however, need a 45mm joint for the neck. For the face details, you've got a couple of options. Now, I'm going to go ahead and use buttons for mine. I've had these very ugly buttons for years, and I've always kept them and thought, one day they're going to work perfectly with a project. So I've got a couple of options there. You can certainly use safety eyes or glass eyes if you wish. And it's a very simple little face. The nose will be added. I have given you a little template for that. I've cut that mine from a black felt. I'm going to be doing some stitching over it to make it a little bit two-dimensional. But I've chosen black as the base. That also has visible webbing applied just to help it keep it nice and sharp. So you will need some pearl thread to sew in a mouth line, a simple mouth line, and some pearl thread to stitch over that template if you wish. Extra strong thread you'll need throughout, and we will be stuffing with polyester fillings, so that's about it. In finishing your doll, you can add any embellishments that you like. I will be making a little neck ruffle out of this fabric, which is going to work with all of them. It's nicely eclectic and all of those colours are still working together. My cuddle dolls do look best with some kind of a neck adornment, so whatever you choose to put around it, even if it's just a big bow, they do look better with something around their neck. So I'll add a neck ruffle. I'll show you how to do that, and I will also probably add a bit of jute string and a few beads just to finish it off. So let's move forward now and get started on our body. I am going to drop in a film clip which will show you how to put the body together. It's the same every time that I've done with all of my cuddle dolls. You'll see in the upcoming footage that it is the elephant, so just ignore the little tail and just continue on. And I will see you back here when I have my little pumpkin body done. Now the body that we're about to make is the body that I use for all of the animal dolls in this series. So even though the colours may change throughout, all of the bodies are put together in the same way. It just saves me having to film that section all over again each time, and it will allow me to give you a whole lot more of a range in this little series. So just follow along regardless of the animal that you're making. This is how you put that body together. The first step in creating the body, we're going to take our 2 back body pieces, and where the opening marks are, we're going to sew a close zigzag stitch on the machine on the edge there, just to bind those edges. It stops it from fraying, and when we go to close that opening, it's going to be nice and neat and tidy and it won't stretch. So our next step is to create a little tail. Now I've made a plait with my yarn, just a little braid, and left some ends free at the end there. I've just tied a knot in the end and stitched across here. So this is the end we're going to pop into the seam. Mine's about 13 centimeters overall. You can make it longer, shorter, whatever you like. So we're going to be sewing the center back seams of both the front and the back body pieces. So these are our front body pieces that don't have any marks on them. So the center front seam are these ones here. So where your mark is at the back, your opening, these are the center back and center front seams. So in the front pieces, we just put those right sides together, and we're just going to stitch with a 4mm seam allowance all the way down to the base there. And I do sew that 2 times because we're going to be adding stuffing. do also make sure that the start and finish of all of your seams, that you back and forth with a couple of stitches to secure it. So when we go to do our centre back seam in exactly the same way, of course we're not going to sew that opening, we're just going to sew from the neck edge down and back and forth, and same here. But here is where our tail is going to go. So we're going to drop that in so that that's caught in between those layers in that seam as we go, and do make sure that you sew back and forth over that section so that it's held well, and make sure that it is all still lined up as you do that. So 4mm seam allowance. I have my jeans needle in my machine, and I do have my machine stitch length set to a number 2, so it's nice and small. You can now go ahead, once you've sewn both those seams, and press them open and flat. It gives you a much better finish in the end. So this is our front and our back. So at this stage, you can go ahead and put those right sides together again. And the seam we're going to sew next is that inner leg seam. It's just a very small little seam, and you want to make sure that you've lined up that center point. So perhaps pop a clip in there or a pin, and we're just going to stitch with that same 4mm seam allowance from the base around. Make sure that you really make sure that that's really nice and secure, so that 2 times that same 4mm seam allowance. There you can see that center inside leg seam stitched, and I've sewn it 2 times. It's nice and strong. And we don't clip that seam. In dressmaking, you would probably clip that seam, but because in soft sculpture, we keep our seams very, very small, and so that we don't have to clip them, because it would definitely compromise that seam. Once we add stuffing, we need it to stay together. So the next thing I've done, before we put this one completely together, I've added my buttons for the front. I've popped my first one about 5 to 6 centimeters from that top neck edge, because remember, we've got pull in around that joint, and you want to leave a little bit of room for a neck ruffle or perhaps a little scarf. So I've got those 2 there. So now we're going to put right sides together, and we're going to sew up those side seams, which of course they will match beautifully. Just popping my clips in there, right the way down the side to the bottom of that leg, and we will sew that 4mm seam allowance 2 times, just the same as before. So the final step in putting the body together is we're going to add the foot pads to the little base of the leg there. So we're going to put right sides together. It's just like pinning in just a teddy bear foot pad. You can start anywhere because it's a circle. So we're just going to take our pin, and we're going to go through all of those layers, flip it over and catch a little bit on the other side. Push that pin head all the way down. This is the easiest way to pin in a foot pad. Start to follow that curve. Pin through both of those layers, flip it over, and just take a little bit up on the underside. Pushing the pin head down just clamps it all into place. Just going to make my way all the way around. It'll fit in beautifully if you've kept to your 4mm seam allowances. There we go, all pinned into place. My next step will be to take my needle with an extra strong thread on it, and I'm just going to overcast that foot pad into place so that I can remove all of my pins. So I've now removed all of those pins, and you see that little foot pad is tacked into place. I now take some extra strong thread, a single strand with a knot in the end, and we're going to sew that foot pad into place using a stab back stitch. I'm going to put the link at the top of the screen there for you to my video that shows you how to sew this stitch, but I will show you a couple of stitches here. So I'm coming in from the underneath with my needle, and the first thing I'm going to do is just make 2 stitches one right on top of the other, just so my start point is nice and secure, and nice small stitches. And so now you see how I'm holding that out flat. I'm coming up from behind and just traveling along the length of one stitch and going back into my last exit hole. So again, I'm going to come up from the underneath, traveling along a little way and back into the exit hole. Because it's extra strong thread, we're sewing it back and front. It's the strongest stitch of all for hand sewing in soft sculpture. So each time you just have to make sure you go back into that exit hole so that the stitch is fully linked. And you should be able to create a line that's just as accurate as you would on the machine. So you can see I'm just going to make my way right the way around that foot pad, and then I will just repeat with the other side. You can go ahead and turn that one through once you've sewn those foot pads in, and do take your time to roll out all of those seams, particularly around those feet, so we've got a lovely rounded finish. And that's our body. That's the way we put the body together on all of the animals in this series. Regardless of the tail that you pop in there, they're all put together in the same way. So now we're going to move ahead and make the arms. So the arms in this case, that's one that I've already made, and I'm making it in the colour that I'm using for the head. So we've looked like we've got a nice naked little arm, and this is the romper. So very simple to do, just pop that one aside and bring this one in. So I've got my piece of fabric folded right sides together. I've pressed it nice and flat, and I've traced around my template, arm template, and I'm going to stitch exactly on that line all the way around, and I do reinforce the lower edge by sewing that section again. Leave that top edge open, make sure you're back and forth on your start and finish, and then we'll come back to cut that one out. So now that is all stitched, I just need to cut that one out, so straight across the top there, and then I'm going to cut approximately just a 4mm seam allowance right the way around the edge. And again, we don't notch or trim this seam, we don't clip the curves because we're giving it a very small seam. We're going to be stuffing this, and we don't want to pop that seam open. So before I turn this one through, because I used a heat erasable pen, I can now take that to my iron and press that, and it will remove those marks, and then I'm going to turn that through. I've gone ahead and turned that arm through, and now we're going to add our filling. Now, just like I have with this one, we pack the end of the arm really firm up to about the wrist and then soften off. You can see not much there, and then nothing for about the top 1.5 inches, because when we add it, we want the arm to sit nice and soft at the sides. If we fill it right up to the end, it'll stick out. So just go ahead and tuck that filling in that top edge there, in that opening. Easiest with forceps. Take that right down to the base there, support the end there, but do pack that hand and wrist very firm. Continue up nice and firm, and then soften it off, and then nothing up until here. Once you get up to there, just bring those two edges together and just stay stitch on the machine across the top to hold that all together. Next, we need to go ahead and add those arms to our body at the top of the neck on each side. So you need to first of all make sure that your little hand is curving towards the front, and we're going to take this straight edge here, and we're going to line it up with our center seam, our side seam here, and make sure that it is just exactly halfway. So here's my side seam, and we're just going to tack it to the top. I'm just using my extra strong thread just to hold that into place. Line it up with the top exactly. It must be right on that seam and centered so that the little arms hang correctly at the side. So these tops of these arms will be pulled in when we put the neck bolt, when we put the head on, and the arms will come out from that neck shoulder section. So it's a great way to add these simple little arms. So I just got that exactly in place. Make sure it's very secure, because the top edge here won't be seen, it'll be drawn in around that bolt. There we go. So as we pull that in around the bolt, that little arm will be caught up in that neck section. So I'm going to do the same. Make sure you line it up on the other side seam exactly in half and stitch the other one into place. My next step is that we sew a doubled strand of extra strong thread, a running stitch just 4 millimeters in from the edge, starting at the back. Leave your tail ends hanging, and sew right around that top neck edge, including those arms. So now I've tied my first knot, and I'm just going to pull on those thread ends and pull that in. So we want to leave just enough room for that bolt to pass through. So just a small opening there. Our disc is 45 millimeters, so it's going to cover all of that. And then knot that off at least 4 times. Right, so I'm back, and this is my little pumpkin doll body. You can see put together in exactly the same way you've just seen with the other one. We can move that one aside and we can start work on the head. So the head is pretty straightforward. You've got your 6 pieces. In my case, I'm alternating the colours throughout. It's very subtle, but there is a difference. So what you're going to do, first of all, the narrowest part, the part that tucks in, this is the neck, and the top part is the head, and we actually will run a drawstring around to pull that in when we're done. What you're going to do is simply just take 2 of these pieces. I have to be careful which ones I put up against each other because I've got different colours. If you're just using all one colour, it won't matter. And what you're going to do is just line them up, and you are going to overcast and stitch a 4 millimeter seam allowance 2 times, and then you're going to add your next pieces in the same way. Now you can do it in 2 ways. I usually put 3 together and put 3 together, and then I put those 2 halves together. Or you can just continue on adding pieces as you go until you've got it all sewn up, and then you do the final one, which closes the head, and you should have a full sphere. Just remember, if you are doing alternative colours, have a think about how you want that to be facing on the front of the head. And for me, I want this lighter colour to be in the centre of the face, and so in the back it will be the darker colour at the back of the head. So go ahead, join them all together. I overcast every piece because it's very important that that head is that beautiful sphere. If you are making this up with fabric, you can certainly go ahead and remove your overcasting stitch from each seam and press that curve out, open and flat. If you're working with felt, you won't need to do it because you can just roll that seam out. So this is how that head should look when it is all stitched up and all of your pieces joined together. So what I'm going to do before I turn it through, the top of the head, okay, here, and make sure it is the top where I've got my marks here, that's the base of the neck. I'm going to start at what will be the back. and I've taken a doubled strand of extra strong thread, and I'm going to sew just about a 4mm running stitch from the edge, 4mm from the edge. I'm going to leave my tail ends hanging, and I'm going to sew a running stitch all the way around that neck edge, like we did with the body, around that neck, until I come back to my start point. And so then I've gone ahead and I have tied a knot and pulled on those drawstrings to pull that top of the head in as tight as I can. It will end up with a small hole there, but do get it as compressed as you can. We need the bolt to go through there, and we only have a small joint, but that will still cover that hole. Knot that off at least 4 to 5 times before you snip your thread ends. Then you can go ahead and turn that head through and take the time to roll out all of your seams. So we have that head all turned through and rolled out. We now have to make our stalk with our leaf to add to the head before we stuff it. So we're going to put right sides together of the stalk. You want you to keep this seam allowance very small with this one, probably around about 3mm if you can. From the base to the top, we leave the top open and the base open. You're going to overcast it first and just sew that 2 times either side. So you can go ahead and turn the little stalk through and roll out those seams. I'm now taking a single strand of 8-ply pearl thread. You can use extra strong thread for this. Coming up through the base here, just to bring it out right on the side here, we're just going to blanket stitch the top opening closed. We do it this way so we can get a nice flattened result. So just as simple as just a little blanket stitch, so needle going through all those layers and bringing our needle out through our thread loop, and keep your stitches nice and small and even just to close that top. And it will give us a nice flattened end and a nice bulbous base. So just like that, all the way to the other edge. And so now, with that end closed, we're going to add a little bit of filling. I'm going to use my forceps to do that. I want to keep the end quite flattened, and then plump it out through the midsection. And I'm really pushing that up there, but controlling it with my thumb and fingers so it's not just turning into just a rounded shape. And I will use my wool felting needle to help pack all of that in. It needs to be quite a solid little stalk to hold itself up at the top of the head. And we're not filling it all the way to the end because we need to add that little joint. Whether you're using a button joint or a regular joint. I like to use my wool felting needle to tap all of that in. I just need to leave enough room to be able to tuck that joint in and pull in around that bolt. So it's probably about 7mm, I'd say, from the edge. I'll just add a little more. So now that stuffing is in and I flattened it out with my wool felting needle, I've sewn again a double strand of extra strong thread, a gathering stitch, just a running stitch all the way around, and met up the other end, left my tail ends hanging, and I've tied one knot. So now we can add our little joint in here with a bolt, pull on those threads nice and tight and pull it in around that bolt and knot it off. If you're using the button technique, you need to get your button and take a doubled strand, a nice long strand, doubled strand of extra strong thread through the buttonhole and back again, and treat that button just like the joint. And you're going to tuck that in and you're going to pull in those threads around these two threads that are pulling out, exactly the same. So now I have that little stalk nicely tied in, and if you're using the button technique, you'll have those 4 threads hanging out here. Before we go ahead and add it to the head, joint it to the head, I've taken my little leaf, which is cut from double felt, and I have sewn on the machine some little vein lines. So you can do that in any manner you like, and that shows up on both sides, and I've used 2 colours there with the felt. I want the darker colour to sit on top. I've made a hole there with my awl that allows me to take my little stalk through that hole. I need to make sure that's actually big enough. If you're using the button technique, you're going to take those 4 threads through here. So there we go, that's my stalk with my leaf, and I have to think about where this is going to sit. So this is my front panel that I'm going to have the mouth and the nose on, and I'm going to tuck that one in there. And using a regular joint, you're just going to get up there in the head. Make sure it's nicely centered and add the other pieces of your joint. So I have just finger tightened that for now so that I can check that everything's right. Remember, this is my center panel, so I want that stalk to be sitting in the right position. You could put it the other way if you like. I like it with the wider part across, and check that the leaf is sitting where I want it to, and I want that little leaf actually to be a little bit more forward. I can curl it over like that. Felt is very moldable in that way, and you can see it gives you that nice little edge around the stalk there with that gathering. I will then go ahead with my spanner and tighten up that nut, and I will add a drop of super glue on the threads around the nut, and that'll stop that ever coming away. If you're doing this with the button method, so you will have taken your threads through the head, through the leaf, and these threads now independently, each 2 threads get taken through the holes in your other button, and then you've got like this little pulley system, and those threads will be coming through here, and then you knot it off, you tie it off. Now you won't get a joint as tight as a normal joint, but it will certainly be sufficient to pull it in, clamp it together, and pull that little stalk down. So now we have that cute little spout and the leaf in place. We can go ahead and stuff the head, and you're going to pack that very firm. I like to use my forceps. I will also use my wool felting needle, and I'll fill to almost the edge again, about 1 centimetre or so from the edge. I will pack it nice and flat and make sure that you plump out all of those lovely curves. And it's much easier to do your facial features on a nice firm packed head. Then we're going to come back and we're going to drop that neck joint in. I have that head now nicely filled, and it's absolutely solid, and I have taken my wool felting needle and I've packed all of that stuffing in there. It's nice and flat, and I have now gone ahead again and sewn another running stitch around the neck edge, leaving the tail ends hanging, a doubled strand. I've gone all the way around. I've started at the back, and it's probably only about 4 millimetres in from the edge. Now I can tuck in that neck joint, pull on those threads, and should be able to really pull in nice and tight around that bolt as far as it will go. Then I will knot that off at least 4 times, and I've left my needle on, so I'll go around again, tie it off again so it's nice and secure. Okay, so now let's start on a little pumpkin face. Now they have a distinct sort of a look. The eyes sit really, you know, level with the top of the nose. It gives them a nice little compressed sort of a look. You don't want them up here, and also I've seen people sit them right level with the nose. I don't like that look either, but you'll find an expression that you like. We will be stitching in a mouth line on the underside, and so pretty much it's right in the centre, in the most bulbous part where that nose goes. Now I've pinned that in place, and I've measured to make sure my stuffing is very even and accurate, and so I can count on the fact that this will be centered if I measure to those seams. And I've put 3 little dots there. What I'm going to do now, I've taken the backing paper off of my little nose piece, and I'm just going to glue it into place. And we're going to let it dry completely because we're going to just do some stitching over the top of it. We can make that quite primitive. And in fact, in my opinion, I think that looks a little better. We do some sparse stitching over the top of it just to hold it in place, but this glue, this is just clear craft glue, fabric glue. Now I can line this up exactly with those marks that I've made. And you can use the palm of your hand to push that into place. The warmth of your hand will start to dry that glue. You can even add a couple of pins just to hold those points, but we're going to let that dry completely. My advice is always do the nose first, because then you'll get the eyes and the mouth in the right position. Going to let that dry, come back and do some stitching over it. Okay, so now I'm back, and that nose piece, that little nose template, is beautifully dry, and I have taken a double strand of 8-ply pearl thread. In my case, I'm going for a dark brown because I want it to be a lighter colour than my template. I want those 2 different colours, and you can do this with any colour. I've taken the double end through. What I want to do is take my needle from the underside first of all. First of all, I'm just going to make a little knot in here so that that thread is captured. Nothing's going to be seen on the underside here. And then I'm going to take my needle out through the back. And where I'm aiming to come out, I'm going to go back into that same hole. I'm aiming to come out right on the corner here of this template. So back into that same hole so nothing shows. I can even make that larger with my awl. Don't want to catch any surface fabric, that's all. Alright, and I want to come out right there on that corner. I can take a few goes to get the right spot. Okay, there we go. Pull that one all the way through. And there should be nothing to see there at the back. And now I've got my thread, I'm going to take it across. Now for me, I'm going to be doing just some cross stitches across the nose all the way up to the top. You can, if you like, simply go straight across and just cover that template with stitches horizontally. But I want a little crisscross pattern, so making sure I'm catching that corner. I'm also making sure that those threads aren't twisted. I'm going to take my needle in there and then just travel underneath the template to what will be my next start point of my next crossover. Take my thread across and down into that first corner, the opposite corner there. So into there, and then again I travel up just a little bit further, and I'm going to crisscross and match them up as I go until that template is covered. Okay, I hope you can see that. So it's just little cross stitches crossing over that nose, and it gives it a lovely effect, and it's lovely to just bring the colour up just one shade. Okay, so, and I finished off by finishing off my final stitch, bringing it out to the back of the head again and casting off. So now we're going to do a very similar thing to sew in the mouth. Now there are a couple of ways that you can do this. I like to just have one doubled stitch that's pulled in from the back. That will give me a little smile, and I can go ahead and add a couple of cross stitches if I wish. You may want to, with a heat erasable marker, draw in a mouth line. You might want a crooked mouth line or something like that, something a bit different. Obviously a straight stitch pulled in is only going to get so much curve, but I like the fact that it'll pull in and give a bit of volume. You can draw it in with this marker, and then you can just simply stitch over it. Come in from the back again and make your stitches to cover that line, just like a back stitch. And then you can remove those marks with a blow dryer or very gently with the tip of the iron. Okay, but for me, I'm going to do what I did before. I'm going to start at the back here again and anchor in my knot at the end. You could increase this thread to a 5-ply if you prefer. It's important that this mouth line is really well anchored in at the back here. Again, I'm just going to dive into the back of the head so that I can bring my needle out where I want it. And I've already made my marks with my pins, and I can test that just by pulling up the corners there, and I can see. Now for me, it makes sense to do it on that seam line because you get it perfectly even. If you want to extend it further out, you certainly can. I'm going to be bringing my needle out right where this pin is, just as we did before. Aim for that spot exactly. Okay, go ahead and pull that through, and then again I'm going to make sure these threads aren't twisted. I'm going to place that stitch where I want it, take my needle in the other side and bring it out at the base of the neck again, and just create that lovely tension there. So I hope you can see there that nice little pull in on that mouth in the corner. It's going to do a tiny bit of shading as well, and that's going to amplify that. So now it's time to add the eyes, and as you can see, the top of my template there is about the center of the eyes, and they are sitting right on that seam line as well. Hopefully that your sewing is nice and even, and the distance will be correct. So I've made holes with my awls, and I have put a mark there so I know where I'm going, and I've taken that awl in at an angle heading out to the back of the head. We put them in this way, so it's exactly the same way that we add a glass eye, only this time I'm using a 4-hole button. I've decided to go with these buttons. I actually want the eyes to be quite small, and I do love the colouring on this one. So I've taken a long doubled strand of extra strong thread through the back, through one of the holes and down and out, cut the threads. Then I've done the same the other way. So now essentially what I've got is 8 threads coming off of that little button, which I've then added to my large doll needle. So now I just need to go directly into that hole, and I'm not catching any of that surface fabric, and I'm aiming nice and low in the center back of the head. And I'm going to pull that through, just as we would any other eye. Now, if you were using safety eyes, you would have to add them before you stuff the head. And in this case, I really think that they look so much better if you're using buttons. You see the pull in I can get on that button there. So now I do the same thing with the other eye. I get that threaded up on my needle. I take it in that hole that I've made, and I bring it out through exactly the same hole that I've just come out of there. And again, being careful not to catch any of that surface fabric. We're just bringing it straight through the hole and the stuffing. And you can make that any colour you like that works with your background colour of the felt. I have pieces of felt here and I have tested them. And I will colour up around the mouth area too. I have got my blender to be able to soften that edge off. Once I pull it in as well, you'll see less of it. And I might just extend that out. What's this one called? Vermilion. The colours they're called don't exactly line up with the colour they actually are, I have to say, as an artist. So always best to test them, don't trust the name. So I'm just going to pull on that group of threads there, pull that eye in. And you can see it's just given a bit of shading, and I need to take that up just a little bit further on the top. But you can see it's just a really nice effect. It gives it a real 3D look. And I will continue up some of that colour into the seams, top and bottom, on both sides. I've got my blender and I can blend it out if I need to. That's looking about right at the moment. I'm just going to repeat with the other side. Okay, so just done a little bit of shading there. So I've also carried down the seam line a little. I used my vermilion down and just fanned out right at the corners of that little smile, and just under the lip line, not on top of it, underneath that lip line, and just fan that out little tiny bit under the nose, not anywhere else, just underneath, thinking about those shadows. And the reason why we do it before we actually pull the eyes in is because we could put the eyes in and then you could say, well, we could just colour around it. There'll always be a space, you can't get right in there. So it looks so much better if the dark colours, they're already on there and it comes out underneath the eye. So I'll do a little bit more shading once those eyes are set. So now I just need to pull on those thread ends, really sink those eyes as deep as I can, keep the tension up and knot that off at least 4 times. When I snip the thread ends, that knot will disappear back into the stuffing of the head. Okay, so that's how his eyes should look when they're sunk and they've got that lovely volume there, pulled in there, and of course that colour around the eye has really set them back. I do go ahead and around the top where we've got our creasing, everywhere there's a crease, I just highlight it because the creases are darker naturally, and it gives it that real lovely pumpkin-y kind of a look. And again, to your own discretion, use a colour that works with the colours. So if you're working with more of a brown, you just need a deeper version of what you're already using. You can follow those seam lines a little way down, and it just all adds to that little piece and that dimension there. So I will play with that for a little bit and then we will move on and we will put this little guy together. Alright, so let's go ahead and put our little doll together. That's all of my shading done. That happy little pumpkin face. We're now going to take our body, which is all ready to take that head. We've got that lovely opening at the top there. Pop that bolt through. And just as we did before with the top of the head, we're going to add the other pieces of our joint. Slip that disc in there. And we're going to add our washer and our nut. And as always, we will just finger tighten this because we need to make sure everything is well pulled out, particularly the little arms, and that everything's centered. Give it a finger tighten. Make sure those arms are sitting nice and even. Nothing's caught up. And then you can go ahead and tighten that up until you can just move that neck joint. then add that drop of super glue on the nut. So that's our little doll all put together, and we just need to stuff him. Now, filling this one is reasonably simple. Do make sure that you fill out those feet, those lovely round little feet, and this crotch area to avoid as much wrinkling. There's a natural little pleat that you'll find will happen, but it should be all very well plumped out. Don't forget the little bottom, and all the way up to the neck and shoulders here, so everything is nicely filled out. And then we'll come back. I will use my wool felting needle to pack that filling in right up to the edge, then we'll come back and close that opening. So my little guy is all beautifully filled out, and this is really, really firm, and all of those lovely curves are all pushed out. Lovely little bottom. And now I've taken my wool felting needle, tapped everything in, everything's nice and packed firm and even. I'm going to take a single strand of extra strong thread in a colour that works for my fabric, big pile of knots in the end, and we're going to close this back opening. So I'm going to take my needle in and bring it out at the seam allowance of 4 millimeters, right where that seam starts to open out. Pull that through and that knot will hold. This is a ladder stitch. I've got a video right here on Pay It Forward that shows you, probably in a better position, how to do this stitch, but most of you are absolutely fluent, but I will run through it. So I've taken my needle across, parallel the other side, and I'm just going to travel within that seam allowance just the length of one stitch. We don't want our stitches too big. There we go. So we've got one stitch going across. I'm going to go back across to my first start point where that knot sits underneath, and I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Just travel the length of one stitch, keep it nice and even with the one on the opposite side, and pull that in. Give it a squeeze, that seam, give it a squeeze, and you've got 2 stitches going across. I'm going to change my needle now to a curved needle. They're great for closing back openings if you can get the needle threaded. So now I go back across, and each time you go into the last exit hole. You can see that a curved needle lets you go in and out really easily. They take some getting used to if you haven't used them before, but once you do get used to them, they're amazing. Every time, give that seam a squeeze and pull on those threads. Back over into the last exit hole, same deal. Travel down, keeping the stitches even. So important that you keep the stitches even so that you're travelling down at the same distance. Is that the right word? Evenly. If you take bigger stitches on one side, you'll end up with puckering at the bottom. And watch that you're staying with your seam allowance. Give it a squeeze all the way down. I'm going to keep going. You must pull it in with every stitch so that it all knits together well. You don't get halfway down and think, I'm going to pull on that thread. It'll just snap the thread, even though it's extra strong. Continue on. When you finish, bring your last stitch in. Bring your needle out somewhere on the seam line here. Make a little surface knot. Dive your needle back in and pop the knot in. So my little doll is all complete, and I am going to make a neck ruffle. I'm going to show you a quick way to make a little neck ruffle here. So I have cut a rectangle. I folded it and pressed it in half with right sides together, ready to be stitched. And I'm using my flannelette in that lovely colour that's going to go with my project. The measurement is 70 centimetres by 13 centimetres. Just a strip, fold it in half, give it a press. And then you just need to stitch, because this side is obviously folded, just sew with about a 5mm seam allowance. You're going to start from the edge and sew all the way down. Just leave an opening somewhere on this straight edge, it doesn't matter where, so that we can turn it through and go up to this end here and finish off here. Then you want to go ahead and turn it through, push it all out, press it all out. Once you have pressed that one out, you can go ahead and top stitch close to the edge all the way around, and then you will close up that opening wherever you put it. I have then drawn a line right down the centre of mine. That line won't be seen on mine. If you need to, you can use a heat erasable marker, but on mine it won't even be visible. So now you could do, a lot of people say to me, why don't you do this on the machine? Well, because the threads will snap, because this is quite thick and we're really going to bunch it up. So I do it by hand with a double strand of 8-ply pearl thread, a nice long strand, and I start at one end, just one side of my line, and I'm going to sew a running stitch all the way. I know it seems daunting, but it really does give you the best result. So I'm just going to make my way down that whole length, pull it all the way through till I've got some threads either side. Then I'm going to repeat the process just the other side of the centre line with another double thread. Now that I have those 2 rows of gathering threads in, I can go ahead and pull on them, and they're nice and strong. I don't have to worry about them breaking, and also they're the perfect tie up for the back of the neck. So I'm just going to gather it all up. You can see how nicely that's going to pull up. You definitely do need to do 2 rows. Always gives you better gathers if you do 2 rows. And I will position that on my doll and tie it up around the back of his neck. It would just sit beautifully. And so this is my little man all done. Now I've added on around that little frill. You can see how well those neck ruffles go on the cuddle dolls. I nearly always, that's what I put on them. It just fills that gap there. I have added a beautiful little tie up with a couple of beads on it, mimicking the sort of pumpkin style, in some jute string which I have braided up and just tied around the centre. He's got almost a scarecrowy kind of look, so he could be, I mean, you can make him for Halloween, for fall. We don't have Halloween here in Australia. It's starting to pick up, it's starting to become more popular, but I know that you'll be able to find all sorts of beautiful trims and things overseas in the States to create a lovely, what could just be a lovely fall interior doll. I think he's absolutely gorgeous. He's one of my favourites in this series. It's been fun making him. I shall look forward to designing some more for you. So thank you for joining me. Okay, so pretty easy project really, and he comes together really quickly, as do all of the cuddle dolls. Have a look at my playlist and you'll find a whole playlist of the cuddle dolls. I've lost count. I'm sure most of you will know how many we've got, but there's all sorts in there. And this is a great one to add to your collection. And you guys know I love a lineup. So if you've made them all, please take some photos and share them on our Facebook page. And then I will put those links down below for our Facebook page and for Masterclass. You can share anything that you've made with my patterns in Masterclass or just here on Pay It Forward. And we love to ooh and ah over them, and we certainly do. I'm a little bit jealous of you all over there in the States, being able to pick up lovely, really Halloween and fall sort of embellishments. I've been watching Disneyland at the moment. I'm seeing they're starting to put all of the Halloween things up, and it really does. It looks amazing. So like I said, not big here on Halloween here in Australia, but I do love the colours. And Mr. T is really happy this month. It's been a full orange month. And even our beautiful raccoon in Masterclass is orange, in a very different way, however. Go and check him out if you haven't seen him. That video should have just gone up. So thank you all for joining me, and everybody have a fantastic creative week. Keep on paying all those good things forward. Until next time, it is hooroo from me.